In those days, I was a contract player, and I wasn't even put in pictures too much at Universal. That was almost what made me decide to quit.
40 years ago, they informed him he was too elderly. Now that he's 94 years old, Clint Eastwood is still dating a lady who is half his age and still creating movies. At 5 in the morning, he begins his wacky routine. Working out would be too taxing for the average 30-something. Not only does he possess a multi-million-dollar piece of real estate just because it looked great, but he also hates birthday parties and pilots his own helicopter. At 94 years old, Hollywood's toughest cowboy isn't only surviving. He's enjoying a life that even his own children find unbelievable. It was never intended for Clint Eastwood to become a legend. The opposite was true in every aspect of his formative years. Contrary to popular belief, he was not born into poverty. At birth on May 31, 1930, he weighed more than 11 pounds, so much so that his nurses affectionately dubbed him Samson. He was born into affluence, and his family enjoyed life in Piedmont, California. They were members of a country club, owned 2 automobiles, and a swimming pool. The line of his ancestors may be traced back to the Mayflower, according to his mom. Clint still didn't have it easy, despite all his advantages. In order to make it in Hollywood, he cultivated an image that was partially based on lies, including the rough blue-collar character he ultimately developed. He had a tough time in school overall, failing junior high and requiring a grade repeat at Oakland Technical High. Because he was preoccupied with pursuing automobiles and ladies, Clint disregarded the counsel of his teachers, who spotted his talent, particularly on stage. It appeared that he was more interested in working on engines than in completing his schoolwork. In fact, several of his acquaintances even suspected that he may never have graduated. Something about him suggested that he had artistic potential. He was a natural pianist. He learned difficult pieces that most teenagers wouldn't even think of practicing till their fingers hurt. He would use that same concentration to compose music for his own films in due time. After finishing high school, Clint dabbled in a number of unconventional careers before settling into acting. When he was younger, he worked in Oregon taming wild logs, a dangerous occupation where an accident may be fatal. He later became a lifeguard and bouncer while stationed at Fort Ord after being inducted into the Army. Even intervened in a knife fight that occurred one night. His life took a dramatic turn in 1951 when a Navy plane he was riding aboard crashed at Point Reyes. Not only that, but he still had over 2 miles of swimming to complete after the collision, during which sharks threatened his every move. When he featured in Escape from Alcatraz, he drew on that same moment to make the cold water escape sequence feel genuine. He subsequently nicknamed it Stark Terror. That experience remained with him for years. His acting career got off to a shaky start. The 1955 low-budget horror flick Revenge of the Creature gave him a small part. A worried lab technician called Jennings, whose big moment was losing a rat, was played by him. The filmmaker was not bashful in showing how much he despised the situation. Clint had to try 15 times before he got the 28 lines just correct. He made $75 weekly, and Universal almost axed the scene altogether. This uncoordinated man fumbling with a lab coat became one of the most famous actors of all time, although no one on set knew it at the time. I am prepared to veto any tax increase that Congress considers sending my way, regardless of how well-meaning or deluded they may be. Also, the only thing I can say to those who want to raise taxes is, go ahead, make my day. His contract with Universal Pictures was terminated after only 18 months in the mid-1950s. They didn't think he could handle the screen. The arguments were so ridiculous that they were almost funny. He spoke too slowly, his Adam's apple was too large, and he wouldn't replace his damaged teeth. Burt Reynolds was also fired at about the same period. Reynolds made a joke as they were standing in the Universal parking lot and said, "You're really screwed, because I can learn to act. You can't lose that Adam's apple." Eastwood went back to the same studio years later, armed with $1 million and a superstar status. Even though they cast him away, they ultimately had to bring him back as a main guy. After that, the turning point arrived. Robert Spar, an executive from CBS, saw Clint one day in the studio cafeteria as he was chatting with an NBC story editor. Spar couldn't help but be captivated by his towering stature. Rawhide, a Western series, offered the main part after a meeting, screen test, and brief gaze. It was just a matter of luck, being in the correct spot at the right time and gazing in the right direction. The guy who was laughed off because of his easygoing demeanor and good appearance was suddenly praised for the very qualities. Producers hailed him as a budding star, and his picture appeared in TV Guide. His clumsy delivery and rough demeanor, which landed him fired, suddenly drew in millions of people weekly. Even Eastwood disliked Rowdy because he believed the character lacked maturity. Nonetheless, he agreed to do it, and what began as a supporting role quickly catapulted him to stardom. It just took 3 weeks for the show to get into the top 20 on television. It was draining behind the scenes, though. 6 days a week, hard hours, scorching Arizona temperatures. His salary skyrocketed from $750 to a mind-boggling $119,000 every episode. Some people continued to think he was unmotivated even after the program concluded. The directors supposedly scheduled their day around his tardiness. In fact, one claimed he never included Clint in the first sequence since he would inevitably be late by 30 minutes. Eastwood reached his breaking point during Rawhide's 6th year. He needed a change of pace and was antsy to do something new. At that point, a peculiar chance presented itself, courtesy of a little-known Italian filmmaker shooting a Spanish low-budget Western. Since American audiences did not take Italian Westerns seriously, Sergio Leone used the alias Bob Robertson. Before considering Eastwood, Leone considered Henry Fonda and James Coburn, but none of them could be afforded. Clint eventually came around. He reasoned that no one in the United States would care if the picture bombed since it was so little. Seeing an opportunity, he boarded a plane to Spain. Because neither he nor Leone spoke the other's native language, they had to rely on interpreters, hand signals, and educated guesswork to get by. Clint Eastwood became a household name all over the world because to that film, A Fistful of Dollars. His performance was noteworthy, but it wasn't all. Eastwood designed every aspect of his character's appearance. He put it together using items from his personal closet. A large studio wardrobe staff did not create it. He acquired a pair of worn-out Levi's jeans, distressed and bleached them, repurposed Rawhide's belts and boots, and snagged a hat from a thrift shop. Everything from the poncho to the little cigars was picked up from random shops he passed. The atmosphere of Eastwood's The Man with No Name was purposefully created. The director intended the protagonist to say very little so that his body language could convey everything. The character's power and mystique were amplified by that prolonged quiet. Viewers still recognized the silent gunslinger even when his character's name changed: Joe Manco Blondie. Because of the studio's marketing, many started thinking of the movies as a trilogy. U.S. critics were not fond of these films when they were released. Reports ranged from Cheap Jack for the first one to Dopey for the second, and a repellent disaster for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in a New York Times review. Time magazine even went so far as to say that Eastwood resembled a plank of wood. The trilogy's global earnings of almost $84 million on a budget of less than $2 million, however, were ultimately decided by the spectators. Almost $39 million and 44 million tickets were sold for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Although reviewers warmed around to Eastwood's spaghetti westerns in due time, he had already altered the game with them. Instead of becoming a Hollywood icon organically, Clint Eastwood seized control of his position and refused to relinquish it. When he played Detective Harry Callahan in 1971's Dirty Harry, he catapulted to superstardom. But he was never supposed to play that part. Frank Sinatra turned it down after a few months. Paul Newman passed on it to Clint Eastwood because he didn't like the political overtones. And Steve McQueen, Robert Mitchum, and John Wayne all declined as well. As Hollywood's A-listers withdrew one by one, Eastwood took the lead. By starting his own production business and employing his own director, He took a risk. It wasn't a hit. The picture bombed. Every Which Way But Loose, a comedy about a street-fighting trucker and his pet orangutan Clyde, was a 1978 production in which he unexpectedly joined on. Thought to be detrimental to his career, Eastwood remained steadfast in his conviction. It was panned by critics, but was a smash hit with audiences. With an additional $70 million from the sequel, the total was over $100 million, or about $1 billion in today's money. One of Hollywood's most bizarre success stories has a disturbing underbelly. Clyde reputedly met a grisly end when his trainer beat him to death for stealing donuts off the set. For Eastwood, taking chances was nothing new. On the north face of the Eiger, he shot the Eiger Sanction in 1975, where a crew climber was murdered by falling boulders. The film's star and director, Clint Eastwood, almost ordered the production to stop filming but ultimately decided to perform all of the risky stunts himself, including scaling cliffs and filming while unequipped with current safety equipment. It was for the film that he put his life on the line at the age of 44. He had survived an aircraft crash into shark-infested waters while serving in the Army, so this wasn't his first near-death experience. He said afterwards that he would have perished from terror on his own if he had known about the sharks. Eastwood's self-assurance also prevented him from pursuing jobs that were not a good fit. Just like James Bond, who recognized his brand as the man with the squint and the pistol, he flatly turned down the invitation to be Superman. In addition to being a starring man, Eastwood had become a formidable force in the film industry with Malpaso Company by the end of the decade. All creative control was in his hands. He altered scripts if they didn't sit well with him and encouraged studios to move forward when they were hesitant. He was able to make a fortune even though others made fun of him for starring in a monkey comedy. He and an advisor founded Malpaso Productions in 1967 after becoming weary with Hollywood's strictness. Malpaso refers to a bad step, a reference to the agent who forewarned him that spaghetti westerns would haunt him. He instead used their funds to build his creative realm on land he purchased near Malpaso Creek. Produced in Carmel by the Sea using actual locales, his first feature film, Play Misty for Me, came in at $50,000 under budget, had Roberta Flack's The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face licensed for $2,000, and wrapped ahead of schedule. His filmmaking career took off when the picture grossed over $10 million. One or two takes, complete calm concentration. That was Eastwood's now iconic approach to filmmaking. The first take, in his opinion, was the most exciting. The actors immediately realized that being prepared was crucial. Although Matt Damon begged for a second take, the advice from Jeff Daniels, "You have to be ready because it's one take," was effective in helping actresses like Hilary Swank and Gene Hackman win Oscars. Unforgiven, once known as The Cut Killings, cemented Eastwood's status as a legend by the early 1990s. Though Francis Ford Coppola was unable to have it produced in the 1980s, Clint Eastwood purchased the rights and patiently awaited their release. Unforgiven, which he directed at the age of 62, was an enormous success, grossing $159 million and taking home several Oscars. As he formally transitioned from gunslinger to filmmaker, he paid tribute to mentors Sergio Leone and Don Siegel in the credits. He gambled again 10 years later with $1 Million Baby, a disturbing picture about physician-assisted suicide. Despite Warner Brothers' lack of backing, it became a smashing success, making $216 million and taking home many Oscars. After demonstrating he could handle weighty topics and yet move audiences, Eastwood went from being respected to unbeatable. The previous year's Mystic River demonstrated his emotional accuracy when it won Oscars for Sean Penn and Tim Robbins. Finally, Gran Torino arrived. The tale of a prejudiced veteran who softens to defend his neighbors struck the ideal emotional chord, earning $270 million, and no one anticipated Eastwood, nearly 80 years old, to produce one of his biggest blockbusters. His mere existence, critics said, was the film's driving force, like Dirty Harry's specter lurking under the surface. Underneath it all was Eastwood's distinctive method, a one- or two-take approach, without the need to yell action or endure long rehearsals. Because shouting on a Western set would frighten the actors, Tom Hanks said that Eastwood handled them like horses. His defining characteristic was the serene, concentrated atmosphere. Even as his fame increased, Eastwood maintained his secrecy. Until recently, Laurie Murray had no idea who her biological father was. It wasn't until she was in her 60s that she found out Clint Eastwood was her dad. She was adopted and reared in Seattle. She publicly presented herself at the 2018 premiere of The Mule after he enthusiastically welcomed her when she contacted out. It was, however, not rare. Kimber was born out of his 14-year romance with stuntwoman Roxanne Tunis, which began in 1959 when he was married to Maggie Johnson. They stayed close until Roxanne passed away in 2023, but he made sure no one knew about it. Afterwards, Sondra Locke came along. They cohabitated for 14 years, although he was still married, which led to a contentious and public breakup due to litigation involving Locks and fraud. Then, in the early 1980s, he met Jocelyn Reeves, a flight attendant, and they had 2 children, Scott and Catherine, but his birth certificate said, "Father declined." The tabloids finally revealed the truth in 1990. After Catherine's internet outbursts in 2024, tensions within the family flared up once more. He met Christina Sandera, a hotel hostess, in 2014, and they were steady in his final years. She was modest and unassuming, preferring to operate an equestrian facility and devote her time to animal care. Those closest to Eastwood witnessed his unwavering sorrow upon her unexpected passing in 2024 due to cardiac problems. The actor who portrayed cold loner roles has warmed up now that he's 94 years old. In contrast to his warm, fun, and completely enamored grandfatherly demeanor, he was cold and aloof as a parent. Francesca claims that he comes to their games, laughs more, and refers to himself as ridiculous when interacting with younger parents. But he is unconcerned about it. He has found a unique feeling of calm as he watches his chaotic, mixed family flourish. At 94 years old, most individuals take it easy, either by reflecting, lounging in the sun, or napping. In contrast to Clint Eastwood, he just wrapped up directing the incisive and disturbing thriller Juror Number 2, in which a juror comes to terms with the fact that he is responsible for the crime he is trying to punish. Eastwood, as usual, filmed it quickly, cleanly, and without fluff, and Nicholas Holt's character faces that horror. No wobbly cameras, no emotional slowdowns, just pure Clint, and his directing is tight even at 94 years old. His instincts are frighteningly precise. Rumors began circulating that he was already casting for his next feature before this one even broke, leading many to believe it was his last. He remains working regardless of his age or retirement status. A YouTube interview with Clint Eastwood discussing Juror Number 2 mysteriously disappeared one night in late 2024, with no prior notice, copyright claim, or official explanation. This caused quite a stir. Magnus, the host, stated it vanished without a trace, which led to conjecture. Since Eastwood had spoken out against #MeToo and political correctness, many pointed the finger to Warner Brothers. The interview disappeared right before the film's release, which fans noticed. Many assumed the studio was trying to silence him because of his controversial opinions. Proponents of free speech in Hollywood claimed that a working legend of 90 years or more should be able to express themselves without interference, while opponents pointed to possible contractual or legal problems. Central to it all is Clint Eastwood, a guy who, despite being 94 years old, shows no signs of slowing down. He rejects any attempt at a birthday celebration, says his daughter Allison, since he would rather work and enjoy life. He has always put his job first, never seeking recognition or fame. The most important thing he taught his co-star Allison was to laugh at life's seriousness. That outlook clarifies everything. His lack of enthusiasm for birthday celebrations and the way he works through tasks with the vigor of a younger person.